Hi, I'm Bob Weber. I'm the CEO and co-founder of 6D Helmets, and we're here at our offices in Brea, California. 6D, we're really all about the pursuit of brain protection. We developed a technology for motorcycle helmets originally, and now that's crossing over into other applications, but a omnidirectional suspension technology that works to mitigate energy transfer to the head form or the brain of a wearer in the event of an accident. So our mission is to protect the athlete and the individual from crash impacts. We started by wanting to develop a better motorcycle helmet. I had some awareness to what helmets weren't doing to the benefit of an individual in an accident, and I wanted to improve that. The rotational acceleration issue, which is what's at the root of a concussion or a brain injury, is critical. And current helmet technology didn't do anything to address rotational acceleration. And so our goal was to figure out a way where we could reduce that transfer to the brain in the event of an accident. And that we got there by figuring out, okay, we've got to separate the outer shell of the helmet from the inside of the helmet. And how do we do that? So the goal was to make a multi-layered helmet with a suspension system that allowed the inside to displace three-dimensionally from the outside in the event of an oblique strike or any kind of strike, really. And we did that with by landing on this unique isolation damper system that we put in the helmet. We have in the motocross helmet, there's 27 individual isolation dampers that ride between the two layers of EPS, and they allow that inside EPS to displace three-dimensionally in the event of an accident. And what that does for the individual is, one, it provides more time into the impact equation, more time and more distance, more travel to slow down. And effectively, that's what you want. You're going to come to a stop in an accident, and you want to do that over the most time and distance possible. So our ability to displace that inner liner gives us time, distance, and then if the energy is high enough in the impact, you're starting to yield the EPS, crush EPS, and that gives you a nice progressive ride down to zero. So that was the whole concept behind our ODS technology and the foundation of our company. ODS stands for omnidirectional suspension, and so what that means is it gives us the ability, our inner liner can displace three-dimensionally in any direction. It's kind of like a ball and socket. It has the ability to rotate and compress and shear within itself, and what that does is scrubs off a significant amount of the energy transfer from a rotational strike onto the inside of the helmet or into the head form. We got a really neat benefit from our design that we weren't really thinking about in the beginning, and that was the low threshold performance of the helmet improved dramatically. By allowing the helmet to displace and compress with the suspension system, the low energy compliance of the helmet was much better. And when you start to study the standards that we all have to meet for helmet certification, those impact velocities, those are very severe strikes at very high velocity impacts. And because the helmet needs to manage energy at that level, down in the lower levels where we most commonly have our accidents, the helmets aren't really doing too much. So down at 3-4 meters per second, you're really not getting into the EPS, and so all of that energy is just being transferred. The nice benefit we got on low energy performance with our suspension system is all of a sudden the helmet's active at zero. So at 1 meter per second, 2 meter per second, 3 meter per second impact strike, those lower energy impacts, the helmet's working and it's scrubbing off that energy and absorbing that energy into the system as opposed to transferring it all to the head form. So nobody ever talked about low energy compliance in helmets before 6D, but now it's a big topic of discussion because we want to tune our helmets to be really effective from about 2.5 meter per second impact to about 6. In that range right there, that is a critical area of energy that is very common in real world accidents. That 7.5 meter per second or 7.75 meter per second impact is most likely a fatality in a human. So we need to be effective in the energy levels down below that, as well as meeting the criteria at those high energy impacts, because of course you've got to keep the skull intact too, and you've got to have a strong enough shell to manage those kind of energies also. So the dynamics of building a motorcycle helmet are really challenging, and the neat thing with ODS, with our omnidirectional suspension, we have the shell matrix and layup to work with. We have 2 layers of EPS. Those can be different densities. They are in some of our helmets are the same. Some of the helmets are different. It depends on the particular helmet and what we were working towards. But the quantity and the array of dampers, the durometer of the dampers, we've got many different components to that matrix that come into play in building the helmet now. And it gives us a lot of flexibility to design a helmet that is really effective over a very broad range of energy management criteria. It kind of came to me that we gotta come up with 2 layers, and so my thought is, okay, well, if we put 2 layers in there, we've got to put some suspension between it. That's got to be some kind of elastomer. But how are we going to keep from yielding the EPS in the location of the damper? And I was thinking, okay, maybe there's a large disc that could go, in there, 3 or 4 of them that would be the displacement suspension capability. But I really knew I needed an engineer to help me solve the problem, and I have a longtime friend of mine, Robert Reisinger. He's a co-founder here at 60 and a good friend of mine for a long time. And Robert's background is in mountain bikes. He owned and founded a company called Mountain Cycles, and one of the very early pioneers in future mountain bike development, suspension and disc brakes. And he did a lot of works with elastomeric suspension dampers on his mountain bikes back in the early 90s. And so I called Robert and said, hey man, what are you doing? I've got an idea on how we could build a better motorcycle helmet. And Robert's also a former professional motocross racer and a Kawasaki test rider in the late 70s and early 80s. And just a brilliant engineer, and he's, his first thing to me was, well, what's wrong with my helmet, and he was unaware of the situation with concussive brain injuries and the problems we have with multi impacts to the brain not being good. And so I forwarded some information to Robert and gave him some stuff to read and do some research on, and I told him what I was trying to do, and he got back to me a couple days later and said, you know what, I think you're onto something here, and there's obviously a problem out there, and helmets haven't changed for a long time. I think we can do this, and I've got some ideas. And so he took the dual layer concept, and we just started evolving it from there, and he came up with a very unique design to the damper that allows it to shear, and gives us that ability for the 3-dimensional displacement. But the design of the damper gives us a very progressive spring rate. So we were able to build a helmet that is, very compliant on those low energy strikes like I talked about, but that also has the ability to manage the high energy strikes when necessary. So with that design, now it was like, how are we going to build it? How are you going to manufacture this helmet? Because there's 54 load distribution cups that have to be in-molded into the EPS during the manufacturing process. And the tooling to support that was very complicated and very expensive, and quite truthfully, we threw away a couple of sets of it that didn't work, as we were trying to make their early prototypes and prove out our ability to even make the helmet. So we had a lot of challenges like that, and having Robert in the engineering function and solving those problems with the factory was invaluable to us. And so we got there, and we were able to get it figured out and solve the issues. So most helmets are manufactured today using EPS. It's expanded polystyrene, basically styrofoam, and it's made in different densities. And in most helmets, it's a monolithic piece of foam that's inserted into the helmet, and that EPS foam has to crush in the event of an accident to do its job, to do work, to absorb and manage that energy and distribute that energy away from the head form. EPS is probably the most ideal material to work with. It's lightweight. It can be easily manufactured into different shapes and forms and stuff. So it is a good material. And once it starts to crush, it crushes at a real linear rate and does a good job of giving you that ride down. The problem therein is helmets can't get too big, but they can't be too small. You know, I had an interesting conversation with a neurosurgeon that his daughter was involved in ski racing, and he was very concerned about the protection from ski helmets. And I told him, I go, you know what, your daughter could wear this helmet in ski racing. There's no reason she couldn't. And his immediate comeback was, well, no, she can't because it's too big. It would cost her, 300 thousandths in her times, And I go, well, you know what the solution is then, because the helmet she's wearing has almost nothing in it. You've got to get the sanctioning bodies to require more standoff from the head so that you guys can get better helmets so that everybody's equal. Because the first job is to protect the athlete, But EPS foam is probably the most ideal to work with. EPP is another material that's being used now and is a multi-impact material, but it's got some challenges in the molding process, and it's heavier, and it's got a few challenges that you got to work around if you're gonna utilize EPP. But it's expanded polypropylene, and so. Anyways, but those are the basic materials in most helmets. In our helmet, the damper is made up of natural rubber, and then we're using that in combination with the traditional EPS.